Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Three Amigos, the Consulting Amigos. I should be more clear about that. Today, Ron Burgess is going to go over some things to help us understand, if you're going to become an entrepreneur, there are certain characteristics that you probably could benefit from. And it's going to tie into what we did with the disc last week, and it's going to have some other elements. And each one of them is designed to make you, as an observer, both in a small business or maybe getting into entrepreneurship, a better idea of what it takes. So without further ado, Ron, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Yeah, this will be kind of a fun review in some ways, but also a little bit of new information. One of the things that I have always been interested in is what kinds of people make great entrepreneurs or small business people. And in working with Rich Trafton for five years prior to him sort of going national, I always was, tried to pin him down on this. It's like, okay, so what about small business people? Can we profile small business people? How can we find out more about who those those successful ones are? Because some of them may not be suited to be in business. And of course, we've had many conversations here about family businesses and trying to fit, fit certain family members into certain slots and that sort of thing. And it doesn't always work very well. And part of the reason is their personalities may not match with what's required in entrepreneurial business. And of course, there's a difference between the startup phase and getting something going and developing a whole new product, of course. And as we talk about, and you can see on the MicroGiants channel, the marketing and specifically the market positioning is very, very critical. And that requires a lot of creative thinking about the product and who your customer is and how your company is going to be formulated and where you fit in the market and differentiation and all those pretty critical things that make a business go when it's new. But, also as a business does grow, it changes its characteristics and needs to have some differences in the way you might start a company. You've got to be able to properly control the numbers and say machinery and process and increase productivity and those kinds of things. Things that Ray works on a lot, and that requires a little different kind of personality. And so we'll talk a little bit about the differences here. Now, I want to say before we get started, I'm not a psychologist. I have worked with Dr. Trafton, as I mentioned, for many years. But we're going to bring in a gentleman who is similar to Dr. Trafton in his background, and his name is Jordan Peterson. He's probably, if he's not the largest personality online today, he's got to be in the top 5 or so, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions. Of views to his material. He's been controversial on social issues, but that's because he's a scientist in the area of psychology, and he has a sense for what is actually true and what's not true. And so he pushes back when certain social things bump into that. So he's gained quite an interesting reputation, good and bad. I'll have to say that based on my experience, 45, 50 years working with people in the 7 businesses that I started, and then also with people in, I don't know, dozens, hundreds of clients since 1989. As a full-time consultant, that the things that he says about personality, forget the social issues, but the things he says about personality match up with Dr. Trafton's, and they match up with my experience. So I feel very, very strongly that these are pretty good benchmarks. Now, there are always the ends in any bell curve when you're measuring things. There are always differences, and if you don't match up exactly, it doesn't mean you can't be successful. It may mean you need to do some things that are not comfortable. And also you have to keep in mind that personality measurement and even behavioral measurement is very, very wishy-washy. In other words, and I don't mean to say it's wrong, I just mean to say that the interpretation is complicated. And so to say that a person is X or Y really can't be the story. It's really, they resemble X to a large extent and they don't have very much Y, or whatever the case is, because we all have variations. So let's jump into this and talk just briefly about the big 5 personality traits. This is, I think, valuable to understand the background, because we've got 5 different major psychological traits that almost all psychologists today agree with. These happen to be from Psychology Today, which is the sort of the premier, one of the top psychology periodicals, and Jordan Peterson has stated this. This is also true with Dr. Trafton. Not every psychologist agrees with all of these, but it's got to be, way over the top in the 90 percentile. In other words, you're only going to have a few outliers who would say, oh no, this is not right. So let's talk about them briefly. These 5 are openness to experience, which they generally kind of shorten to openness. This includes, and the video we're going to show, Dr. Peterson will jump into a couple of these to a much greater aspect. But briefly, it includes some intellectual curiosity and your creative imagination. It sort of says, yeah, I'll try that out. I'd be interested in learning more about this. Or you think we should try it this way? Okay, let's give that a shot. They'll give a lot of things a try. And so creativity really emanates from a lot of people who are very open to experience or have a lot of openness. Conscientiousness is, in a way, the opposite. Conscientiousness has to do with how people view their task. It could be the organization, how structured is the organization, what are their responsibilities, and how sensitive are they to getting everything done exactly right. Last week, 2 weeks ago, Ray talked about this with the DISC, and these are these people that don't leave their desk until they've checked all the boxes. These are the folks that make sure that everything got done, and then they'll double check it to make sure that they didn't make a mistake, that everything got done. And so they're really good for people who do, say, accounting work or process work where you're looking at quality. So, repetitive kinds of tasks that could be either sort of low mental need or very, very high mental need. You could be on both ends of the scale, but in both cases, they're very diligent in making sure that gets done. Then you've got extrovert.
Ron, I just wanted to give you an update on Ed. He lost his internet, and so he's trying to get back in, and I told him we would just go on and he could look at the video. So
okay, great. And then, of course, extroversion is that I think we all kind of get a sense for extroversion. The opposite is introversion. It has to do with sociability, how comfortable you are in a social situation, whether or not you're very assertive in social situations, etc. An introvert will tend maybe not to start up a conversation in a group of people that he doesn't know. An extrovert will, walk into the middle of a group of people and say, "Hey, how you doing? Here's, I'm Ray Anderson, and what are you talking about? And you're right there." Right. And so that the other thing that's interesting is that extroverts get a lot of energy from people, and introverts have energy depleted from people. So while I am more of an introvert than I am an extrovert, and Ray, you're very much an extrovert, and I enjoy people And people are surprised to hear that, when I do an assessment, that I'm a little bit on the introverted. But I can go for days and never see a person and be very happy with that. Yet at the same time, people are surprised because I've learned to be social and I like people and I like conversation. However, if I'm with people all day, as I used to be, in my old workaday world, I would get home exhausted. And somebody who's really extroverted would be with people all day long, come home, look around, and go, "Hey, let's go out." So there's kind of the difference. Agreeableness is really a sort of whether or not you trust people easily or you have a little bit of skepticism. It also includes compassion, respectfulness, and some people, it takes them a while to trust other people. I'm one of those. I require an awful lot of experience, information, and time in order to be able to really go, okay, this guy has got it. Other people are like, oh yeah, I spent 15 minutes having a conversation. I like them, and they absorb whatever information that they really need, and they're just ready to go. And it's like, yeah, we're partners. Let's start a business. That's kind of a bad idea, by the way, in terms of starting a business if you happen to be agreeable. Neuroticism is sort of like, now we're getting into it here. And of course, I think people know what being a neurotic person can be. It has to do with tendencies of anxiety and depression. This might almost be a little bit chemical based on my understanding, because if depending on what your brain, what your endocrine system and all the other chemicals are doing in your body, some people have a little bit more serotonin and dopamine than other people do. And in a recent survey, I just saw that as many as 80% of people tend to be skeptical or concerned about the future. They're not optimistic, and only 20% are optimistic about the future.
Wow.
That 20% they happen to have a correlation with having higher levels of serotonin and dopamine automatically. Now, I believe, and I think we all understand it, our attitudes has a lot to do with what chemicals can and do get released in our systems that would cause those. But nonetheless, if you have a natural tendency to be a little bit depressed, that just is what it is, and that will require some special work. However, we're going to really focus on, so having gone through the big 5 personality traits, we're going to focus on what are the ones that make good workers. And this ends up kind of being a little shocking. And here it is.
Ron, before you go on, I just wanted to make an observation. One of the things that, as I look at these, they're very consistent with what I've observed using the disc. They all kind of help define somebody. I think one of the challenges, and what I try to say, and I wondered how you felt about this, but I think, some of this is genetic. I mean, I think we're born with these traits, and that's why the disc doesn't really all change all that much. And some of it's nurture, but I think there even the dopamine you talk about, and some of the chemicals that are running through our body, are more prevalent by gene code in some people than others.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that, and that's a whole series of discussions in itself. And I think it's important to say, because we've had this discussion before, a personality is different than behaviors. Mm-hmm. We can change our behaviors generally more easily than we can change our personality. And as Dr. Trafton would say, there are only 2 ways to change your personality. One is a religious experience, mm-hmm. and the other is lots and lots of psychotherapy. And so those assessments that measure your personality characteristics or your personality traits, they don't change very much, because it's really, really hard to change those. Having said that, as it relates to different kinds of assessments, you can still moderate yourself by catching, when a certain characteristic is coming forward in a certain social or say work situation. So knowing where you are and who you are is a pretty good tool to be able to cope. Let's face it, we all remember the old Peter principle, and that is that an organization tends to elevate you until you become incompetent in your job. I think that's not very poetic. Maybe
Right.
You can remember,
but we rise to our own level of incompetence is what
that's
it
it.
Down to.
That's it. So you go up, you do well, you go up, you do well. Pretty soon they put you into a job that actually you've done well in all the other things, but maybe now you've gone into some kind of an administrative job that you're not really naturally suited for, and you get there and you go, oh my gosh, I don't really like the job. I don't know what I'm doing. I find myself more anxious about getting it done, etc. So,
and I was going to say on that, we've all run into situations, I think all three of us, in which we find some technician that we really think he's doing a swell job, and then we make him a manager, and within a year he's gone.
Yeah.
The skill sets are not interchangeable.
Right. Which, by the way, is why assessments before moving people from one kind of a position to another kind of a job is a really good idea as well.
Yeah. No, great observation.
So when we take a look at what correlates to success, this is a little bit shocking, and this comes from Jordan Peterson, and we're gonna see this short clip here in just a second. But basically, high success correlation in our workplace. So he's talking about America, North America, Europe, etc., where we're highly industrialized, and there are a whole lot of jobs that are not as manual as they used to be. That the number one correlation is intelligence. Now, we don't like to talk about this socially because we want to hope that we're all as intelligent as the next person. But the truth of the matter is that when you measure intelligence, it comes out on a bell curve, and you've got people on the top, and most of us are in the middle and on the bottom. But in a way, it doesn't matter because the intelligence correlates, I think it was a 0.7, very, very high correlation for success in a job and intelligence. As much as we would like not, and I've studied several authorities on this subject, and those who have really studied intelligence really have statistically irrefutable proof that this is the case. Now, we have to leave that alone because we don't really test for intelligence in most job assessments. There are indications of intelligence. The 16PF by IPAT, the one that we have used for many, many years, 15 or more years. That one has an assessment, but it's not an intelligence test. It's not an IQ test. It's an assessment on how rapidly you can learn. So you're given a new set of information, how quickly do you pick up that new information? So that does correlate a little bit with intelligence, and it does also correlate with success in most jobs that we have today in our country. The other one is conscientiousness. Now, remember, we talked about conscientiousness. So these are the people who come to work on time. They know that they're supposed to get A, B, and C done, and by gosh, they will not leave until A, B, and C are done. Now you combine those two, and the conscientiousness correlation is lower than with intelligence to success, but it still nonetheless is a correlation, a slight correlation. Now, when we look at the other ones, there doesn't appear to be much of a correlation. So those other three, or actually this is one, the other four, not a high correlation with success. Interesting. So those are the two that for most kinds of jobs make sense. So if you want to be really good at something, be very high in conscientiousness and very smart, and you'll probably succeed because you'll be promoted into the higher paying jobs. But how is that the same or different than an entrepreneur? Somebody who wants to start their own business. Well, interestingly, intelligence is also a high correlation for those who are successful in business. But a huge difference is openness is the other correlator, not conscientiousness. Now, openness, as we discussed very briefly, really you can think of it in terms of creativity. You have to be very creative in order to be able to figure out how to get a business that will fit into a niche that can be successful and have customers. And that it's that ability to shift quickly, to try something new, because the last thing isn't working or the current thing is not working, or to adjust to a new product because you get new feedback from your customers or whatever. But these people are willing to turn on a dime, and therein lies where most successful entrepreneurs are. Now, I think that that's really kind of an outrageous thing, because that's not the way we might want to pattern our world if it was ours to try and design. I think we would tend to say, well, we believe in equality and everybody should have the same kind of opportunity. And I think that's a kind of a universal thing. The problem is that we're not the same. Not to say one is better or worse at all. I mean, who are we to make those judgments? But it is, and there is a difference. And so being a difference, as business people, you have to act rationally. And certainly small business people who start businesses must react rationally. They can't do it on a wing and a prayer, because you'll be one of the 80% of business go broke in the first 5 years. So those are the two correlations. So now what I'm going to do here is attempt to do something new in our experience. And so let me just see if I can actually do this without disconnecting. And that is, I'm going to go over to here. Yeah, does it sound okay? I'm just going to play this on through. It's only 8 minutes, and so we'll just go all the way through it.
Whose name is Hideo Resi. He's an absolute monster. The guy started, he started all those schools in 5 years, 165 schools in all across the world, 8 different languages. And we've been screening people for entrepreneurial ability. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you almost have the opposite profile as a soldier. You're very high in openness and you're lower in conscientiousness, or at least conscientiousness is irrelevant. And the reason for that seems to be that, like, if you're an orderly person and you like to follow procedures and rules, it's kind of hard for you to start a company, because when you first start a company or engage in any other creative process, because entrepreneurs turn out to be the same as artists, you kind of have to, you're not operating within a rule-governed structure. In fact, there may be many times where you have to break a small rule to move properly at a higher level of analysis. There's no algorithmic way of generating a new company, right? Obviously. And so it's people who are very high in openness who happen to be good entrepreneurs. And so this is something I thought was extraordinarily cool, because we'd also already known what predicts managerial, administrative, and academic ability. And IQ is crucial for any complex job, so we'll just leave that behind. But what predicts academic ability, for example, at the University of Toronto, is intelligence, obviously, but also conscientiousness. The correlation between creativity and grades at the U of T is 0. Right? But it's not surprising. The thing is, it's easy to be cynical about that, but one of the things you have to understand about creative people is that they continually step outside of the domain of evaluation structures. Right? Because if you're going to say you're going to evaluate the performance of 100 professors on their lecturing ability, well, you kind of have to measure what's common across all the professors in order to come up with the standards for evaluation. Well, that means you're not going to be able to use that structure to evaluate a particularly creative professor, because he or she is going to do something in a way that's so different that it won't show up on the evaluation measure. And of course, that's what happens in universities. Somebody sent me a couple of days ago, somebody sent me an essay that they had written for their master's thesis that was wildly creative, and they were basically told to leave the program. And that they couldn't continue. Not in the mean way. What happened was that what they were thinking was so outside of the conventions in the discipline is that no one had any idea what to do with the essay. So then that's really the lot of creative people, right? They're always stepping outside of evaluation structures. And so it's not that surprising that the relationship between creativity and grades at the U of T is 0. We found out as well by looking at graduate student performance across multiple institutions that there was a negative correlation between creativity and graduate school performance. It wasn't even 0, it was worse than negative. Being creative was negative. And you think, well, that could make you cynical as well, but you can't be cynical in that way, because one of the things that happens in science is that science tends to progress incrementally rather than in great leaps. Now and then someone comes along who blows the structure out of a science and advances it ridiculously, like Einstein. But like, most people aren't Einstein, and maybe thank God for that. Most of the time you're in a discipline, you understand the discipline, and then once you've developed understanding of the discipline, you know what the next micro question is that should be answered. And part of the reason that science is so powerful is because it allows people who aren't genius-level creatives to make real advances in the generation of knowledge, one tiny micro step at a time. It doesn't matter if there's 100,000 people doing it, and each of them is making a micro step, man. We're zipping along as fast as we possibly want to zip along. And so it turns out to be conscientiousness that's the excellent predictor of graduate student performance. That's the best predictor for law. It's the best predictor for managerial positions. It's the best predictor for administrative positions. Anything that has a structure of rules that needs to be applied, conscientiousness is a great predictor. So, but it's not good for predicting artistic ability or entrepreneurial ability. And that's also really important, because one of the things, this is partly why bureaucracies stultify, right? Because what happens is as they develop, they get chock full of conscientious people, with a few psychopaths thrown in there just for good measure. They get chock full of conscientious people busily zooming efficiently down a single track, and then all of a sudden the landscape shifts and they're going very, very efficiently in exactly the wrong direction, and then the whole bloody thing falls apart. So you need to have some creative wingnuts in your organization to come up with completely absurd ideas that might just on the off chance be true. And so creativity is strange in that manner too, because it's a high risk, high return game. You're a lot safer in your life to find a functioning entity and to operate as a cog within it, as long as the entity keeps functioning. Because if you're creative and you go off on tangents all the time, there's some probability that one of those tangents is going to be exactly what is needed at the time, and you're going to become hyper successful as a consequence. But there's much more probability that even though some of your ideas might be highly valuable, the probability that this is the right time and place for them is extraordinarily low. So to produce a successful creative product, for example, in the marketplace, you need a ridiculous combination of creativity so that you keep generating ideas, and then a network around you of people who have skills that you don't, and then the production of a product, let's say, whatever that happens to be, that's actually in demand by the marketplace at exactly that moment, and that someone else hasn't already done better. So the sensible thing to tell anybody who wants to be creative is, that's stupid. You shouldn't do it. It's your probability of success is so low that it's better just to do something sensible. But the problem with that is that creative people can't do that because they're creative. And if they shut down their creativity, it's like an extrovert who's gone to live in an isolated cell. A creative person who isn't being creative, they just wither and die.
Yeah.
So they're stuck with it. So, but it is a high risk, high return strategy. So probably better if you want to be creative, or if you are, and you should take this advice to heart, because I've been watching people for a long time. If you want to engage in a creative pursuit, you should find something stable to do that will generate you an income, and you should pursue the thing that you're creative about on the side, because monetizing creative production is so bloody difficult that, especially now, especially in artistic domains, generation of music and that sort of thing, it's like you just have no idea how many million songs there are on the internet, and the vast majority of them, commercially available, get downloaded 0 times. like 80, I think there's 80 million songs or something like that on the net. And I believe it's something in the neighborhood of 70 million get downloaded 0 times. And then there's 100 that can get downloaded like 350 million times. And so those people are wildly successful and everyone else collapses in failure. Yep.
Does high creativity necessitate low conscientiousness?
No. We'll talk about that more. Okay, so that's not a bad overview for initial foray into psychometrics.
Okay, so kind of interesting, stimulating. I I love that piece because. No, excuse me, we have a snafu here.
We can still hear you.
There we go. So sorry, it ran onto the next YouTube video. I think that's very interesting. I've listened to it several times, and you know, probably dozens, if not hundreds, of hours of Jordan Peterson. You can see he's very dynamic, and he's very positive about what he says because everything he says is backed up by 100% statistical reality and science. And so there's really no wiggle room here. If you disagree with him, you're gonna have to bring some big guns in order to be able to have any traction at all. After spending 40 years trying to figure out why small business people are successful, this has answered a huge piece of my quest because you know there are a lot of characteristics that I go through in seminars about who are the people who are successful entrepreneurs, the successful ones, the ones who become, say, millionaires. And for the most part, you can kind of sum it up a little bit because depending on the business, that's a big, you know, depending. This is what he says is absolutely true as far as I can determine, that you've got a lot of creative people who are trying a lot of different things. However, and I think the however is there are businesses that are very basic that more conscientious people can in fact run. And so you know, if you're talking about a machine shop and you've got and you're filling a certain niche, and now this is where we get into niches and positioning. If you're filling a certain niche and there are not a lot of people who can come in there and jockey against you directly, you can go along for many years. There's a machine shop here in town that's existed for maybe 80 years. The sons and grandchildren are in the business now. So this will be the 4 generations. There may be somebody in that family that's creative that can kind of shake things up a little bit, but for the most part, these are highly skilled machinists who do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again to a very high degree of precision. They can survive because they don't have to be creative in their marketplace. Their marketplace, of course, will change, and they will not be able to. And so, you know, if there's ever no longer a need for the kinds of machining that they do, they'll just die in the vine. And they might say, well, that's just the way it is. But they won't even try to make a change or to do something different because they're paralyzed because of their personalities. And so it's not to say small businesses can't exist, but starting a small business is very, very difficult without that creativity. So, guys, pipe up. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think I really, in my mind, he validated, you know, my use of the disc over the years because I've been able to find creativity and conscientiousness on there and realize that, you know, any good team is not, and with Nokia, we found the same thing, that the team is only as good as the composition of the people in it, you know, and if you have all creatives and you have no conscientious, you know, you get all these ideas, but nothing gets done. But on the other hand, if you all have conscientious, no creativity, everything gets done, but nothing new comes out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, if the bolt ever changes design, it's like what
yeah,
should we do
why
now?
would we change this?
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much.
I'm taking a minute here to analyze my profession as a CPA. You know, a CPA, I think we'd all agree, is very conscientious. They follow rules to the extent they have to be, otherwise they're going to get sued. And that permeates how they operate a business. But when they're trying to help people that are running businesses, I don't know if there's a match there. And I've always wondered about that because they always focus on the past. They focus on risk avoidance. And to operate a business, you have to be creative and you have to look for new opportunities. And there seems to be in conflict. And I guess that's what I've been dealing with my whole life, that conflict.
Yeah, well, right.
If I was going to say this about looking at your disc graph, is that, you know, you are not what we typically see in CPAs. I have another friend.
Right.
Do you know Ray Ashworth, Ron?
Oh yeah, yeah. We've had
Ray's
him do
also
work
a
for us.
CPA,
Yeah.
and his personality is an awful lot like Ed's, you know.
Yes, that's true.
He's, outgoing, and he wants to get things done, and he's creative, you know.
Well, he knows how to look outside the box,
Yeah.
and he gets involved in a lot of the same things Ed does that are sort of outside the purview of a direct, say, financial statement. You know, it's like, okay, that's what the financial statement says. Most CPAs will kind of stop there, but Ed and Ray Ashbaugh would go beyond that. It's like, okay, where's our tax implication? Your productivity is looking a little bit strange. Let's look at some other ratio analysis. And by the way, I noticed too much water cooler talk or whatever, you know. So that kind of thing. But yeah, I would agree with you, Ed. And let me also mention, you're a musician.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also true. Yes.
Yeah. So while a lot of people will say mathematics and musicians meet up, that's not the same thing as accounting. Accountants are not mathematicians in that sense, even though there's some ratio analysis and you have to understand math. They tend to be very, very much rule followers, which is why they are great on taxes, which is why we all go to them for our taxes and maybe not any of the other 5 or 6 types of accounting that actually exist. But I think that it's pretty interesting too that when you think about the transitions of a business, I mean, part of the reason that the 80% failure is because they're too creative. They want to do something that they want to do without any regard for the customer or the marketplace.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have the orientation that you're going to solve a problem and get a customer and then be innovative, then it's sort of like you want to invent something. And inventors so often have this invention in mind, and all they want to do is produce the invention. They don't want to sell it.
Right.
They don't care if they sell it. They just want to invent it.
Yeah.
Which is very much like an artist. Now, I have an art background as well as a business background, and so I'm one of those kind of like you, Ed. That's a little bit of sort of split personality, maybe. But I find it that I've had to very much work on the sort of the diligence part of what I do. The advantage, of course, is that because I'm highly creative, I can take a look at client situations very quickly and have a sense for where to go and where they might be successful, et cetera. That has been a huge asset for me. Yet I've had to learn and understand a lot of the mechanical pieces in order to be very good at being consulting and being a consultant. So that's been, but I've started 7 businesses. That's a classic creative endeavor. And so, that's, however, I've also had some that grew enough to need administration. And administration was never something I really enjoyed. But intellectually, I knew I had to have it. And so I understand financial statements reasonably well. I'm a terrible bookkeeper. I can't follow the rules. I can't do that. Not to say that I haven't done that. And there have been times when I've taught a bookkeeper how to do some of the basic stuff to get them started in a job and, that kind of thing. But give me a whole day to do accounting, and I am just exhausted at the end of the day, because I just cannot stand the idea that I have to stay in that box all day long. I've got to expand my mind a little bit. And the entrepreneur has to learn that there are phases in the business that will require them backing off. So where does this happen, and how do we get them to do it?
That's why you have to, in my opinion, trying to be an entrepreneur, start a business all by yourself is very, very difficult to do, because you have to do all these things. Whereas if you partner with somebody who's got skills that you don't have, or personality you don't have, like Ray was saying, and you learn to work together, then you get the benefit of both. And it kind of grounds the entrepreneur, and it also makes the conscientiousness person more open to new things. So it kind of makes sense to me, but it's so hard to find two people that are compatible enough that get that point and they're willing to work together. Yeah. It's a very powerful thing in running a business, for instance.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And business, of course, if you wanted to take it to the next step, it isn't just you adding your ability to it. If you had a team that came in that had different abilities that you could merge together, that you work together for the benefit of the corporation, I think there's a lot of potential there.
I agree completely. And in fact, I suppose you could argue that if you're going to start a business, you better plan on it being big enough to include these different kinds of personalities. In other words, if it's just going to be you, you're going to be saddled with you the whole time, right?
That's exactly right.
You might not ever get out of the realm of you. Now, I sort of like working on my own and not being accountable to anybody. But I always have to have a bookkeeper, for instance, and I always have to have people to do things that I don't want to do, whether it would be contract or an employee. But there is a certain, when we built Red Fusion, I knew that we had to have X number of skills. We had to get to a minimum of 5 people in order to have all the skills necessary to even be in business. So, I see some of these small businesses forming, going, well, we'll add one person and we'll add the second person. Sometimes you have to think bigger than that and get the people to start the business all at once.
I like the idea that he came up with. He says, focus on a profession that pays the bills, and then also focus on your creative side, on developing something that could be a potential business down the road. Trying to merge them all together, it's really difficult. If you're stuck in a box doing the same thing day in and day out, you're not going to meet your aspirations in life. So you're going to get down, you're going to get depressed, you're going to get very, very bored.
Yes.
Whereas if you can figure out a way to do several different things at the same time, I think you could come up with something that really makes a lot of sense. You can build I like this idea, build for the future and take care of the present.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I was going to add is, I think, there's so much room for a hybrid. And I think that's what Ed's been kind of asking us to do. And the Three Amigos are an example of that. We are 3 people who are loosely affiliated. We don't really have any structure that we do, but we're able to share, understanding and things like that. And I think today's marketplace, in a gig economy, you can find the 5 people you need and you can hire them part-time. The whole notion about getting Ed to work with a small business as a part-time controller makes so much more sense than going out and paying $100,000 to get one internally.
Absolutely.
And so I think, what I'm hoping that people can take away from this is that there are ways of being able to collaborate outside of the box and get a business going without having to hire 5 people. Too many times I see entrepreneurs hiring what they can afford, but they never get what they need.
Yeah, well said. And
that's very well said.
Yeah, and a good place to leave it for today. So thank you very much.
No, that was good. Thank you, guys.